Elena had always trusted David completely. After 25 years of marriage, she believed she knew every corner of his heart, every shadow of his character. He had been her rock during her recent illness, the attentive husband who brought her medications on schedule, who drove her to doctor appointments, who held her hand during the worst nights of pain and uncertainty. When the doctors finally declared her recovery successful, David had been there to celebrate, his relief seeming as genuine as her own. The security cameras in their comfortable suburban home had been broken for weeks. Elena felt vulnerable during her recovery, especially when David was at work and she was alone with her lingering mobility issues and occasional memory lapses. The illness had taken more from her than she cared to admit, leaving her dependent on David in ways that both grateful and frustrated her. When she decided to secretly hire a technician to repair the cameras, it was purely for her own peace of mind. She simply forgot to mention it to David, a small oversight that would become the key to uncovering the most devastating betrayal of her life. Testing the newly repaired cameras seemed like a simple task. Elena expected to see an empty house on her phone screen, confirmation that the system was working properly while David was supposedly at his office downtown. Instead, the crystal-clear image that appeared made her blood run cold. David was in their living room, but he wasn't alone. His business partner Robert sat across from him at their coffee table, and between them was a woman Elena had never seen before. All three were surrounded by papers, documents spread across the surface with the casual familiarity of people conducting regular business. The audio quality was perfect, capturing every word of their conversation with chilling clarity. Elena's hands trembled as she realized what she was witnessing. "The life insurance policy is worth $750,000, David was saying, his voice carrying none of the warmth she thought she knew. "I increased it after her diagnosis, just like we planned." The insurance company didn't question it since spouses typically increase coverage during health scares. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. The life insurance increase David had mentioned in passing, claiming it was just responsible planning given her recent illness. He had been so casual about it, so caring in his explanation. Now she understood the true motivation behind his apparent concern. The unknown woman leaned forward, examining a document in the afternoon light streaming through Elena's own windows. "Albert says the mental competency paperwork is almost ready," she said, her voice clinical and cold. "We just need a few more documented incidents of confused behavior to make the case ironclad." Confused behavior. Elena whispered to herself, remembering the past weeks when she had indeed felt more scattered than usual, more forgetful. David had been so understanding, so patient with what she had assumed were normal side effects of her recovery. "The medications are working perfectly," David continued, and Elena felt the world tilt beneath her. "The placebos I've been giving her instead of her real prescriptions are causing exactly the kind of confusion and weakness we need. Dr. Martinez hasn't suspected anything because Elena keeps telling her she's taking everything as prescribed." The room seemed to spin as Elena processed this revelation. The medications David had been so careful to bring her, the pills she had trusted him to organize and dispense, had been fake. The weakness, the memory issues, the confusion that had been plaguing her recovery weren't natural side effects of her illness. They were the result of her husband's calculated sabotage. Robert's voice cut through her horror. "How long before we can move forward with the commitment process?" The woman, who Elena now realized must work in medical administration, consulted her notes. "I can expedite the paperwork once we have Albert's documentation. With my connections at the facility, we can have her admitted within 2 weeks of getting the mental incompetency ruling." "And if she resists?" David asked. "That's where the backup plan comes in." The woman replied with a smile that made Elena's skin crawl. "Accidents happen in those facilities all the time. Confused patients wander into dangerous areas, miss medications, fall downstairs. The $750,000 payout would be entirely justified." Elena had to grip the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. They weren't just planning to steal her money or her house. They were planning her death. Her husband of 25 years, the man she had shared her bed with, her dreams with, her recovery with, was calmly discussing her murder as if it were a business transaction. "Elena's been more alert lately," David said with a frown. "Yesterday, she asked me specifically about which medication she was taking. I had to make up some story about the pharmacy changing manufacturers. We need to accelerate the gaslighting, Robert suggested. Make her question her own perceptions more aggressively. I've already started, David replied. I've been telling Dr. Martinez and our friends that Elena's been having more severe memory issues, mood swings, even some paranoid thoughts. I'm building a pattern that will support Albert's paperwork. Elena realized with dawning horror that David had been systematically destroying her credibility for weeks, maybe months. Every concerned conversation with friends about her condition, every whispered consultation with medical professionals, every gentle suggestion that she might be more confused than she realized, had been part of an elaborate campaign to isolate and discredit her. What about her family? The woman asked. Elena's parents are dead, and she's not close to her sister. David explained with the casual efficiency of someone who had thoroughly planned every angle. I've already started laying groundwork there too. A few phone calls about being worried, about Elena becoming unpredictable and sometimes aggressive. When the time comes, her sister will support whatever medical intervention I recommend. The betrayal cut deeper than Elena thought possible. David wasn't just stealing her future. He was stealing her past, rewriting their shared history to paint her as an unstable burden rather than the loving wife who had built a life with him. The forged signatures on the will and power of attorney documents are perfect, Robert said, shuffling through papers. Albert's contact at the notary office confirmed everything looks legitimate. Once Elena is committed, David will have complete control over all assets, including the joint savings, David added with satisfaction. She has no idea I've already moved most of it to accounts she can't access. By the time anyone thinks to check, if they ever do, I'll be able to claim she authorized everything during one of her confused episodes. Elena's legs gave out completely. She slid down the kitchen cabinet until she was sitting on the floor, staring at her phone screen in numb disbelief. The man she had trusted with her life, her health, her financial security, had been systematically dismantling everything while she recovered from an illness that had already weakened her so much. The conversation continued, each revelation more devastating than the last. They discussed the timing in detail. David would bring in more fake doctors for home visits, professionals who would document Elena's supposed deterioration. He would stage incidents where she appeared confused or unstable to neighbors and delivery people. The bathroom and bedroom cameras he had insisted on installing for her safety were actually being used to record her during vulnerable moments, creating a library of evidence to support their narrative of mental decline. She trusts me completely, David said with what sounded like pride. Yesterday, she thanked me for being so patient with her confusion. She actually apologized for being such a burden during her recovery. The cruelty of this statement broke something fundamental in Elena's chest. She had been grateful for David's care, had felt guilty for needing so much support, had praised him to Dr. Martinez and their friends for being such a devoted husband. Every moment of genuine vulnerability had been weaponized against her. The beauty of this plan, the unknown woman continued, is that it's nearly impossible to disprove. Mental decline in recovering patients is common enough that no one questions it. Elena's own medical team will support the commitment if David presents them with enough documented evidence of incompetency. And Albert's people at the care facility will make sure she never recovers enough to contradict our story, Robert added. Elena forced herself to keep watching, to keep listening, even as every word felt like a physical blow. She needed to understand the full scope of their plan, needed to know exactly how far they were willing to go. What if she somehow becomes suspicious? The woman asked. David laughed, and the sound was unlike anything Elena had ever heard from him before. Cold, calculating, completely devoid of the warmth she thought she knew. She's already questioning her own mind because of the placebos. If she starts getting paranoid, that just provides more evidence for Albert's paperwork. Her suspicion becomes proof of her mental illness. Perfect, Robert said. When do we move to the next phase? I'm bringing Albert's fake medical certificates to Dr. Martinez next week, David replied. They'll show that Elena's been evaluated by specialists who confirm rapid cognitive decline. Dr. Martinez has been Elena's doctor for years, but she'll have to accept documentation from certified neurologists. Elena's heart sank further. Dr. Martinez had been nothing but supportive during her recovery, but if David presented official-looking documentation from specialists, she would have no reason to question its authenticity. Elena's own testimony about feeling fine would be dismissed as lack of insight into her condition. The house papers are ready too, the woman added. Once David has power of attorney, we can move forward with the sale. The market analysis shows we should get at least $600,000 for the property. Their home, the house where Elena and David had built their life together, where they had celebrated anniversaries and holidays, where she had recovered from her illness believing in his love and support. They were discussing its sale as casually as trading a stock. I want to be very careful about the timing, David said. Elena can't die until at least 6 months after the commitment. We need to establish a clear pattern of legitimate medical treatment before the accident occurs. The insurance investigation has to show that we exhausted all reasonable options for her care. Elena realized she was listening to the detailed planning of her own murder. David wasn't just a faithless husband or even a simple thief. He was a calculating predator who had spent months, possibly years, developing a plan to systematically destroy her mentally, financially, and ultimately physically. $750,000 from the life insurance, plus whatever we get from the house sale, minus Albert's fees and the facility costs, Robert was calculating aloud. We're still looking at over $1 million in profit. Profit. They were discussing her death in terms of profit margins. The meeting continued for another hour, covering every detail of their conspiracy with professional thoroughness. They had backup plans for every contingency, alternative strategies if Elena became too suspicious or if any medical professional questioned their narrative. They had researched the legal requirements for mental competency hearings, the insurance company's investigation procedures, even the specific medications needed to simulate various forms of cognitive decline. Elena discovered that David's betrayal went back much further than she had imagined. He revealed that he had been documenting her behaviors and conversations for over a year, creating a false timeline of cognitive decline that began before her illness even started. He had been telling their mutual friends that Elena was becoming forgetful and sometimes confused, establishing a narrative that her recent health crisis had simply accelerated an existing problem. I started planting seeds about Elena's memory issues 18 months ago, David explained to his conspirators. Little comments to friends and neighbors about her repeating stories or forgetting appointments. When she got sick, everyone was already primed to believe that her recovery might include cognitive complications. The sophistication of his manipulation was breathtaking. David had been grooming not just Elena, but their entire social network to accept his version of her mental state. When the time came to have her committed, he would have a chorus of well-meaning friends and acquaintances ready to testify about their concerns regarding Elena's apparent decline. What about her work colleagues? The woman asked. Elena had a successful career before her illness. Won't they find this sudden incompetency suspicious? Elena retired early due to her health issues, David replied smoothly. I made sure she burned those bridges by suggesting to her supervisor that the stress of work was contributing to her confusion and mood problems. Elena thought she was making a responsible decision to focus on her recovery. In reality, I was eliminating potential witnesses who might contradict our narrative about her mental state. Elena remembered that conversation with her supervisor, how David had been so supportive of her decision to take early retirement, how he had helped her write the letter explaining that her health issues made it difficult to maintain her previous level of performance. She had been grateful for his understanding and support. Now she realized he had been systematically isolating her from anyone who might question his claims about her competency. The financial manipulation has been even easier, David continued. Elena trusted me completely with our joint accounts. Over the past year, I've been gradually transferring money to accounts she doesn't know about, making it look like we've been spending more than usual on her medical care and home modifications for her recovery. Elena's mind raced as she tried to calculate how much money David might have moved without her knowledge. She had been so focused on her health and recovery that she hadn't been paying close attention to their finances, trusting David to handle the details while she concentrated on getting better. The beauty of this approach, Robert observed, is that Elena's own illness provided the perfect cover for every aspect of the plan. Her legitimate health issues made it believable that she might develop cognitive problems. Her necessary dependence during recovery made David's control seem natural and caring. Even the financial changes could be explained as medical expenses. Exactly, David agreed. When we commit Elena, Everyone will see it as a tragic but inevitable progression of her health problems. No one will suspect that her condition was artificially created and manipulated for financial gain. Elena realized that David's plan wasn't just sophisticated, it was nearly perfect. He had used her genuine love and trust against her, weaponized her real health crisis to create a false narrative of mental decline, and positioned himself as the devoted husband heroically caring for his deteriorating wife. Any attempt she made to expose his conspiracy would be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a woman whose mental illness was already well documented by seemingly objective medical professionals. The meeting began to wrap up as the conspirators finalized their timeline. Albert would have the fraudulent mental competency documentation ready within a week. Dr. Williams would conduct his fake evaluation of Elena within 10 days. The commitment paperwork would be filed immediately after that, with Elena's admission to the facility scheduled within 2 weeks. Once Elena is institutionalized, David explained, the final phase becomes much simpler. The facility I've chosen has an excellent reputation and a very low survival rate for patients with Elena's documented condition. Most families are grateful when their loved one's suffering ends peacefully. And if Elena somehow survives longer than expected? The woman asked. Then we adjust her care plan accordingly, David replied with chilling casualness. Patients in her condition often refuse to take their medications or become combative with staff. Sometimes they wander away from secure areas despite safety protocols. There are many ways a confused, deteriorating patient can have a tragic accident. Elena was listening to her husband discuss the various methods he might use to murder her, speaking about her death with the detached professionalism of someone planning a business merger. The man who had held her hand during chemotherapy, who had brought her flowers when she felt her worst, who had kissed her forehead and promised that everything would be all right, was calmly calculating the most efficient way to kill her for money. The insurance investigation will be minimal, Robert added. Elena will have been under professional medical care with documented cognitive decline and behavioral issues. Her death will be seen as an unfortunate but not unexpected outcome of her deteriorating condition. I've already started preparing for that eventuality, David said. I've been telling people how difficult it's been to watch Elena decline, how hard it is to see someone you love losing themselves piece by piece. When she dies, everyone will see me as the grieving widower who did everything possible to care for his beloved wife. Elena realized that David was already practicing his performance as the bereaved husband. He was building a public narrative of his own suffering and sacrifice that would make him a sympathetic figure when she died. People would comfort him, praise him for his devotion, and never suspect that he had orchestrated the entire tragedy for financial gain. After they left, Elena remained on the kitchen floor for nearly 2 hours, her phone clutched in trembling hands. The recordings were automatically saved to her cloud storage, but she knew the evidence alone wasn't enough. David's plan was so sophisticated, so carefully designed to make her appear mentally incompetent, that even her own testimony might be dismissed as paranoid delusions. The psychological impact of what she had discovered was almost overwhelming. Every loving gesture from David over the past months, every expression of concern, every moment of apparent tenderness, had been a calculated performance designed to manipulate her into compliance while he prepared her destruction. The man she had shared a bed with for 25 years, who knew her deepest fears and most intimate vulnerabilities, had been using that knowledge to systematically dismantle her life. Elena forced herself to get up from the floor and move to her bedroom, where she could think more clearly about her situation. David had made one crucial mistake in his otherwise perfect plan. He had underestimated the woman he was trying to destroy. Elena had not survived a serious illness and built a successful career by being passive or helpless. She had simply been trusting the wrong person with her life. But recognizing David's underestimation was only the first step. Elena needed to understand exactly how sophisticated his plan was before she could develop an effective counterattack. She spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the recorded conversation, taking notes on every detail, every name mentioned, every timeline discussed. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Albert was clearly a corrupt lawyer who specialized in elder fraud, probably with a network of accomplices including the contact at the notary office and the people at the care facility. Dr. Williams was a fraudulent medical professional willing to provide false evaluations for money. The woman whose name Elena still didn't know had connections throughout the medical administration system that could expedite Elena's commitment. But what terrified Elena most was the realization that David had been planning this for much longer than she had initially understood. His references to establishing her narrative of cognitive decline over the past 18 months meant that he had been preparing her destruction since before her illness even began. Her health crisis hadn't inspired his betrayal. It had simply provided him with the perfect opportunity to execute a plan he had already been developing. Elena tried to remember the early signs she might have missed. Had David been different in the months before her diagnosis? Had there been changes in his behavior, his treatment of her, his handling of their finances that she should have noticed? The problem was that any such changes would have been subtle, designed to avoid raising suspicion while gradually laying the groundwork for what was to come. She realized that David's most powerful weapon had been her own trust and love. Because she believed completely in his devotion, she had interpreted every manipulation as genuine care. When he began describing her as forgetful to friends, she had assumed he was worried about her. When he took control of more of their daily logistics, she had been grateful for his support. When he suggested early retirement from her job, she had appreciated his concern for her health. David had weaponized her illness not just as cover for his conspiracy, but as a tool to increase her dependence on him. By encouraging her to reduce her outside activities and connections, he had isolated her from potential allies who might question his narrative about her condition. By taking over their financial management during her recovery, he had gained access to their assets while positioning himself as the responsible spouse handling practical matters. Elena began to understand that David's betrayal wasn't just about money, though the financial gain was clearly his primary motivation. He had also enjoyed the power and control that came with manipulating someone who trusted him completely. There had been satisfaction in his voice when he described how grateful Elena was for his patience with her confusion, how she apologized for being a burden during her recovery. The next few days were the most challenging of Elena's life. She had to continue acting like the confused, dependent wife David expected while secretly planning her counterattack. Every interaction with him became a performance that required tremendous psychological strength. When David brought her medications, she had to pretend to take pills she now knew were designed to incapacitate her. When he made caring comments about her recovery, she had to respond with gratitude while knowing he was actively sabotaging her health. David's behavior became even more manipulative once he believed his plan was accelerating. He brought up her memory issues constantly, pointing out minor mistakes or moments of confusion that she now realized he was deliberately creating. When she couldn't find her car keys, David suggested she might have put them in the refrigerator during one of her episodes. When she questioned a bill that seemed unusually high, he gently reminded her that she had approved the charge but probably didn't remember. The psychological warfare was insidious and effective. Even knowing what David was doing, Elena found herself questioning her own perceptions. The line between genuine confusion from her illness recovery and artificially induced doubt became increasingly blurred. David's gaslighting was so sophisticated that he could make her doubt her memory of conversations that had happened just hours before. But Elena had advantages David didn't know about. She had regained access to her real medications by secretly contacting her pharmacy and arranging for new prescriptions to be delivered when David was supposedly at work. She had begun taking them properly again, and the improvement in her mental clarity was dramatic within just a few days. She also had the security camera recordings, which she backed up in multiple locations David couldn't access. More importantly, she realized that the same system that had captured David's conspiracy could continue documenting his manipulation attempts, providing real-time evidence of his efforts to gaslight and deceive her. Most crucially, Elena had Dr. Martinez. Their relationship went back 15 years, and the doctor had seen her through multiple health challenges. Dr. Martinez knew Elena's normal personality and cognitive baseline better than anyone, including David. If Elena could get to Dr. Martinez privately, she might be able to expose David's conspiracy before he could execute the next phase of his plan. Elena's biggest challenge was finding a way to contact Dr. Martinez without David's knowledge. He had been monitoring her communications more closely lately, always volunteering to make her appointments, often staying in the room during medical consultations to help her remember what the doctor said. Elena realized that David's apparent concern for her medical care was actually surveillance designed to prevent her from contradicting his narrative about her condition. The opportunity came when David announced he had to travel to a business conference for 3 days. Elena suspected this was actually when he planned to meet with Albert and finalize the fraudulent documentation, but she didn't challenge his explanation. Instead, she waited until he left, then immediately called Dr. Martinez's office. "Dr. Martinez, this is Elena Morrison," she said when she finally got through to the doctor directly. "I need to schedule an urgent appointment, but I need it to be completely confidential. David cannot know about this visit." There was a pause before Dr. Martinez responded. "Elena, that's an unusual request. Is everything all right? Are you safe at home?" "Dr. Martinez, I need to tell you something that's going to sound incredible, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond," Elena said. "My husband has been systematically poisoning me with fake medications, building a false medical history about my mental decline, and planning to have me committed to a care facility where he expects me to die, so he can collect $750,000 from my life insurance." The silence that followed was lengthy. Elena could hear Dr. Martinez processing this information, probably trying to determine whether Elena was experiencing the kind of paranoid delusions David had been describing to her. "Elena," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "those are very serious allegations. David has been quite concerned about your mental state since your recovery began. He's mentioned some confusion, memory issues, and what he described as paranoid thoughts." "I know," Elena replied. "David has been building that false narrative for months, possibly longer. Dr. Martinez, I have recorded evidence of David discussing his plan with his accomplices. I can prove everything I'm telling you." "Recorded evidence." Dr. Martinez's tone shifted slightly, becoming more alert and less concerned about Elena's mental state. "David thought our security cameras were broken, but I had them repaired without telling him. I recorded a meeting where he discussed the medication switching, the forged documents, the planned commitment, and his expectation that I would die in the care facility within 18 months. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, if what you're telling me is true, this represents one of the most sophisticated cases of medical abuse and elder fraud I've ever encountered. But I need to see this evidence before I can take any action." Elena felt a surge of hope. Dr. Martinez wasn't dismissing her claims as paranoid delusions. She was treating them as potential criminal activity that needed investigation. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" Dr. Martinez asked. "I'll arrange for you to enter through the back entrance so no one sees you arrive. And Elena, if your husband has been switching your medications, we need to run immediate blood tests to determine what substances have been introduced to your system." That afternoon, Elena drove to Dr. Martinez's office for what felt like the most important appointment of her life. She brought her phone with the recorded conversations, copies of documents she had found hidden in David's study, and a detailed timeline of David's behavior over the past year. Dr. Martinez listened to the recordings with increasing alarm, her expression growing more serious with each revelation about David's conspiracy. When the recording reached the point where David discussed Elena's expected death in the care facility, Dr. Martinez paused the playback. "Elena," she said, "this isn't just medical malpractice or financial fraud. This is a conspiracy to commit murder. We need to contact law enforcement immediately." "But what if they don't believe me?" Elena asked. "David has been so careful to build this narrative about my mental decline. What if the police think I'm a confused woman making paranoid accusations?" "Elena, I've known you for 15 years, Dr. Martinez replied firmly. "I've seen you handle complex medical information, make difficult healthcare decisions, and navigate challenging treatments with complete mental clarity. The woman I'm talking to right now shows no signs whatsoever of cognitive decline or mental incompetency." Dr. Martinez stood up and moved to her computer. "We're going to do comprehensive cognitive testing right now to document your actual mental state. Then we're going to run complete blood panels to identify any substances in your system that shouldn't be there. After that, we're going to contact a specialist in domestic abuse cases and law enforcement officers trained in elder fraud investigation." The cognitive testing took 2 hours and involved multiple assessments of Elena's memory, reasoning ability, decision-making capacity, and mental acuity. Elena scored within normal ranges on every test. with results that clearly demonstrated she was fully competent to make legal and medical decisions for herself. The blood tests were even more revealing. Elena's system contained traces of 3 different medications she wasn't supposed to be taking: a mild sedative that could cause confusion and disorientation, an anti-anxiety medication that could impair memory formation, and a blood pressure medication that could cause dizziness and weakness even in people without hypertension. Elena, Dr. Martinez explained as they reviewed the results, "You've been systematically poisoned. These medications, in the combinations and dosages we found, would create exactly the kind of cognitive impairment David has been reporting. The fact that you're functioning as well as you are suggests you have tremendous resilience, but continued exposure to these substances could cause permanent damage." "How long has this been going on?" Elena asked. "Based on the blood levels, I'd estimate David has been giving you these substances for at least 3 to 4 months, possibly longer. The good news is that with proper medical support, the effects should be completely reversible once your system is clear." Dr. Martinez made several phone calls while Elena processed this information. Within an hour, Elena was meeting with Sarah Chun, a domestic abuse specialist who handled cases involving financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, and Detective Rodriguez, a law enforcement officer trained in investigating elder fraud. "Mrs. Morrison," Sarah Chun began, "what your husband is doing represents one of the most sophisticated abuse schemes I've encountered. He's weaponizing the medical system, the legal system, and your own recovery process against you. The level of premeditation involved here makes this attempted murder rather than abuse." "Attempted murder?" Elena repeated. "Elena, according to your recordings, David and his accomplices were discussing your death as the intended endpoint of their plan," Detective Rodriguez explained. "They weren't just planning to exploit you financially, they were planning to kill you. That makes this a homicide conspiracy, which is a federal crime." The investigation that followed was unlike anything Elena could have imagined. Federal agents specializing in elder fraud worked with local law enforcement to build a case against David and his accomplices. The evidence Elena had gathered through her security cameras was crucial, but investigators needed additional proof to ensure successful prosecution. "Elena," Sarah Chun explained, "we want to set up a controlled operation where you continue to appear cooperative with David's plan while we gather additional evidence. We'll install professional surveillance equipment in your home that can capture every conversation and activity. Most importantly, we want you to wear hidden recording devices during what we expect will be David's final push to have you committed." "Is that safe?" Elena asked. "What if David becomes suspicious?" "We'll have agents monitoring the situation constantly," Detective Rodriguez assured her. "If David's behavior becomes threatening or if we believe you're in immediate danger, we'll intervene immediately. But ideally, we want to let David proceed with his plan until he and his accomplices commit crimes we can document directly." Elena felt a mixture of terror and determination as they prepared the operation. The woman David thought he was systematically destroying was about to become the architect of his downfall. But she also understood the risks involved. If David realized what was happening before law enforcement could act, he might abandon his careful plan and resort to more direct violence. The surveillance equipment was installed in Elena's home while David was supposedly at work. Technicians placed microscopic cameras and audio devices throughout the house, creating a comprehensive monitoring system that would capture every conversation and activity. Elena was also fitted with sophisticated recording devices that were completely undetectable when worn properly. "Remember, Elena," Sarah Chun instructed her, "your goal is to get David and his accomplices to confess their entire plan on record. We need them to admit to the medication switching, the forged documents, the insurance fraud, and their ultimate intentions regarding your death. Without their confession, much of this case relies on circumstantial evidence that a defense attorney might be able to challenge." Elena returned home that evening and continued her performance as the confused, compliant wife David expected. The hidden recording devices captured his attempts to gaslight her, his false expressions of concern about her condition, and his careful monitoring of her behavior for signs that she might be becoming suspicious. The opportunity they had been waiting for came 3 days later. David announced that he had arranged for a neurologist to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of Elena's cognitive function. "Dr. Williams is a specialist in age-related cognitive disorders," David explained with fake concern. He comes highly recommended, and he's willing to do a home visit since travel can be challenging for you. Elena knew immediately that Dr. Williams was Albert's accomplice, the corrupt medical professional who would provide fraudulent documentation for Elena's commitment. This would be her chance to record their conspiracy in action while law enforcement monitored every word. "That's very thoughtful of you," Elena replied, adjusting the hidden microphone under her blouse. "I want to make sure I get the best possible care." Dr. Williams arrived the next morning accompanied by Robert, and the woman Elena now knew was named Janet Morrison. Elena recognized all three voices from her security camera recordings, but seeing them in person made their betrayal feel even more surreal. "Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Williams said with professional warmth that felt entirely manufactured, "your husband has told me about your recent challenges with memory and confusion. I'm here to do a comprehensive evaluation so we can determine the best course of treatment." Elena played her part perfectly, acting slightly confused and submissive while the hidden cameras captured every moment of their fraud. Dr. Williams asked questions designed to make her appear incompetent, interpreting perfectly normal responses as evidence of cognitive decline. When Elena correctly answered questions about the date and her location, he noted confabulation and false confidence in her responses. When she asked for clarification about complex questions, he documented inability to understand simple instructions. But the most damning evidence came when Dr. Williams thought Elena had stepped out of earshot. She had excused herself to use the bathroom, but the sophisticated surveillance equipment captured their conversation perfectly. "This is almost too easy," Dr. Williams told David. "She's showing exactly the kind of compliance that makes these cases straightforward." "The medications have made her much more manageable," David replied. "When I started switching her prescriptions, she was still too alert and questioning. Now she just accepts whatever we tell her." "How long have you been giving her the placebos?" Janet asked. "Since about 2 weeks after her initial diagnosis," David admitted. "I wanted her recovery to be slower and more complicated than normal. The confusion she's experiencing isn't natural recovery symptoms. It's artificially induced cognitive impairment." Elena had to grip the bathroom sink to keep from making a noise. Even knowing what David had been doing, hearing him admit to deliberately sabotaging her recovery while she was at her most vulnerable was devastating. "The life insurance increase was brilliant timing," Robert added. $750,000 is enough to make this worthwhile, but not so much that it triggers automatic investigation. And the facility you've selected will ensure that Elena never recovers enough to contradict our assessment," Dr. Williams confirmed. "Patients with her documented cognitive decline rarely survive more than 18 months in that environment." 18 months. They were discussing the timeline for her death with the casual efficiency of planning a vacation. Elena returned to the living room where Dr. Williams completed his fraudulent evaluation. He pronounced her suffering from moderate to severe cognitive decline with episodes of confusion and disorientation that pose a significant risk to her safety and well-being. His recommendation was immediate commitment to a specialized care facility for her own protection. "I'm afraid Elena is no longer capable of making responsible decisions about her care," Dr. Williams told David with practiced sympathy. "The power of attorney documents will be essential for ensuring she receives appropriate treatment." David produced the forged documents Elena knew Albert had prepared, papers that would give him complete control over her medical care, finances, and living situation. The signature pages were designed to look routine, hidden among legitimate-seeming medical forms and insurance updates. "Elena, these are just updates to your medical information," David explained with the gentle tone she had once found comforting. "Dr. Williams needs your signature to coordinate your care with the facility." Elena held the pen over the signature line, knowing that every moment was being recorded by multiple hidden cameras and that federal agents were monitoring the situation from a van parked down the street. This was the moment when David's conspiracy would be complete and undeniable on record. "David," she said quietly, "before I sign these, I want to make sure I understand what's happening to me." "Of course, sweetheart," David replied, his voice full of fake tenderness. "What would you like to know?" "I want to know why you've been giving me fake medications for months, why you've been building a false medical history about my mental decline, and why you're planning to collect $750,000 from my life insurance after I have an accident in the care facility." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched the color drain from David's face as he realized their entire conspiracy had been exposed. Dr. Williams looked at Robert and Janet with panic, clearly calculating whether they could somehow salvage their plan or if they needed to flee immediately. "Elena," David said finally, his voice shaking, "I don't know what you're talking about. You're obviously having one of your confused episodes." "Am I?" Elena stood up from the table and walked to where she had hidden her phone with the original security camera recordings. "Would you like to see the video of your conversation with Robert and Janet 4 days ago where you discussed increasing my medication dosage until I was genuinely incapacitated?" David lunged toward her, but Elena had anticipated this reaction. She stepped back as the front door burst open and FBI agents, local police officers, and medical fraud investigators flooded into her home. David Morrison, Janet Morrison, Robert Shun, and Dr. Michael Williams, the lead FBI agent, announced, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, elder abuse, and medical malpractice resulting in serious bodily harm." Elena watched as handcuffs were placed on the 4 people who had spent months planning her systematic destruction and death. David's final words to her were not an apology or expression of remorse, but a snarl of frustrated rage that revealed his true character. "You ungrateful bitch," he spat as officers led him toward the door. "I wasted 25 years of my life on you. You were supposed to be my retirement plan." 25 years, Elena repeated, her voice steady despite the magnitude of betrayal she was processing. 25 years of marriage where you were apparently just waiting for the right opportunity to kill me for money. The federal prosecutor who handled Elena's case explained that this represented one of the most sophisticated domestic abuse and elder fraud schemes they had encountered. The evidence collected through the surveillance operation was overwhelming. Recorded confessions, documented medical malpractice, forged legal documents, and a clear timeline showing months of premeditation. "Elena," the prosecutor told her during their preparation for trial, "your husband and his accomplices face potential sentences of 25 years to life in federal prison. The medical malpractice alone carries severe penalties, but the conspiracy to commit murder makes this a capital case." The investigation revealed that David's conspiracy was even more extensive than Elena had initially realized. Albert was indeed a corrupt lawyer who had facilitated similar schemes for other clients. The care facility David had selected had an unusually high mortality rate and was already under investigation for suspicious deaths. Dr. Williams had provided fraudulent medical evaluations in at least 12 other cases, all involving elderly patients whose families stood to benefit financially from their commitment or death. "Elena," Detective Rodriguez explained, "your courage in exposing this conspiracy has broken up what appears to be a professional elder abuse ring. We're looking at dozens of potential victims whose families may have used similar methods to exploit or eliminate them." Elena's recovery, both physical and emotional, took many months. The artificial cognitive impairment caused by David's medication switching had been more extensive than anyone initially realized. Her system had to be completely detoxified under medical supervision, and her real medications had to be carefully reintroduced to support her genuine recovery from her original illness. But the psychological healing was far more complex than the physical restoration. Elena had to process the reality that her husband of 25 years had been planning her death while she trusted him completely with her care and recovery. "Elena," her new therapist explained, "you've survived one of the most intimate betrayals possible. Your husband weaponized your illness, your recovery, your trust, and your love against you. The person who was supposed to protect you during your most vulnerable time was actually orchestrating your destruction." The trial lasted 8 weeks and made national headlines as an example of the sophisticated medical abuse that vulnerable adults could face from their closest family members. Elena's testimony was devastating in its clarity and detail. She had become an expert on her own victimization, able to explain exactly how each element of David's conspiracy had been designed to destroy her while appearing to be loving care. David's defense attorney attempted to portray Elena as a mentally unstable woman who had misinterpreted normal marital tensions as criminal conspiracies. But the recorded evidence was undeniable. Juries heard David's own voice discussing the timeline for Elena's death, his satisfaction with the effectiveness of the fake medications, and his detailed knowledge of the insurance payout procedures. David Morrison viewed his wife's illness not as a challenge to face together, but as a business opportunity, the prosecutor argued in closing statements. He saw Elena's vulnerability not as a call for protection, but as a weakness to exploit. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. This was a calculated campaign of medical torture designed to end in murder for financial gain. All 4 defendants were convicted on multiple federal charges. David received a sentence of life in prison without possibility of parole. Dr. Williams lost his medical license and received 25 years for medical malpractice and conspiracy to commit murder. Robert and Janet each received 15 years for their roles in the conspiracy. Albert received 20 years and was disbarred permanently. Elena's civil lawsuit against the defendants and their professional organizations resulted in a settlement that provided her with financial security for the rest of her life. But more importantly, her case led to new federal legislation requiring additional oversight for medication management in home healthcare situations and enhanced background checks for medical professionals providing in-home evaluations. Elena, Dr. Martinez told her during one of their follow-up appointments, "You've transformed from victim to survivor to advocate. Your courage in exposing this conspiracy has probably saved other vulnerable adults from similar abuse." Elena moved to a new city where she became involved with organizations dedicated to protecting elderly adults from financial and medical exploitation. Her story became part of training programs for healthcare workers, law enforcement officers, and social workers who might encounter similar cases. "I learned that love and trust are not the same thing," Elena often told audiences when she spoke about her experience. "Love is an emotion. Trust is a decision that should be based on consistent evidence over time. David convinced me that questioning his behavior meant I didn't love him. In reality, questioning behavior that seems suspicious is essential for protecting yourself, especially when you're vulnerable." The house where David had planned Elena's destruction was sold, and she used the proceeds to establish a foundation providing legal support for adults experiencing medical abuse from family members. The irony was not lost on her that the home David had planned to sell after her death became the foundation for protecting other potential victims. Elena's physical recovery was complete within a year of David's arrest. Her cognitive function, free from the artificial impairment caused by his medication switching, returned to levels that exceeded her baseline before her original illness. But the emotional recovery was an ongoing process that required Elena to completely reimagine her understanding of their 25-year marriage. "I had to accept that the man I thought I loved had never actually existed," Elena explained to her support group. "The David who held my hand during my illness was the same David who was poisoning me to accelerate my decline. The husband who expressed concern about my memory was the same person systematically destroying my mental capacity. I wasn't mourning the loss of my marriage. I was mourning the discovery that my marriage had been a lie." But Elena also discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Her ability to maintain her performance as the confused, compliant wife while secretly gathering evidence required tremendous psychological resilience. Her willingness to risk everything by confronting David's conspiracy demonstrated courage that surprised even her. "I thought I was weak because I had trusted David completely," Elena reflected. "I thought I was naive because I hadn't suspected his betrayal earlier. But I realized that my capacity for trust wasn't a weakness. It was a strength that David had chosen to exploit rather than cherish." Elena's new life was built on principles that her experience with David had taught her. She developed relationships slowly, observing people's behavior over time rather than accepting their words at face value. She maintained complete control over her medical care and financial affairs, never again allowing another person to have access to information that could be used to manipulate her. But Elena also learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and paranoid isolation. Her experience with David had taught her to be alert to red flags, but she refused to let his betrayal prevent her from forming meaningful connections with trustworthy people. "David wanted to destroy my ability to trust anyone, including myself," Elena said. "He wanted me to become so dependent on him that I couldn't imagine surviving without his care. But the opposite happened. I learned that I was stronger than I knew, that I could survive the worst betrayal imaginable and build something better from the wreckage." 5 years after David's conviction, Elena received a letter from him in prison. He claimed to have found religion and wanted to apologize for his actions. The letter was full of explanations about financial pressure and fear of poverty in old age, attempts to make his conspiracy seem understandable rather than evil. Elena read the letter once and then shredded it without responding. She had no interest in David's apology or his attempts to rewrite their history. Her recovery and her new life were not about forgiveness or reconciliation. They were about building something authentic from the truth of what had happened. David spent 25 years lying to me about who he was and what our marriage meant to him, Elena told her therapist. I don't need his apology to heal from that betrayal. I need to continue building a life based on honesty, both with myself and with the people who earn my trust through consistent, caring behavior over time. Elena's story became a testament to the possibility of recovery from even the most sophisticated betrayal. She had been targeted by people who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities, who had access to her most intimate fears and medical information, who could manipulate the very systems designed to protect her. But Elena had also demonstrated that intelligence, courage, and the support of trustworthy professionals could overcome even the most calculated conspiracy. Her willingness to gather evidence despite tremendous personal risk, her ability to maintain her performance while secretly planning her counterattack, and her decision to prosecute rather than protect her abusers had saved her life and probably prevented other victims. I survived because I was willing to believe my own perceptions even when everyone around me was telling me I was confused, Elena said in her final interview about the case. David's greatest weapon was convincing me that I couldn't trust my own mind. My greatest strength was deciding to trust myself anyway, even when it meant destroying everything I thought I knew about my life. Elena's home now was filled with art, books, and photographs that reflected her authentic interests rather than compromises with David's preferences. She traveled to places she had always wanted to see, pursued hobbies that interested her rather than ones that impressed others, and surrounded herself with people who appreciated her intelligence and independence rather than her compliance and vulnerability. David saw my recovery from illness as an opportunity to exploit my weakness, Elena reflected. But that recovery taught me something he never understood, that surviving trauma makes you stronger, not weaker. I had already proven I could overcome a serious illness. Overcoming his betrayal was just another form of healing, and I had already learned how to heal. The legal protections that resulted from Elena's case have helped identify and prevent similar schemes across the country. Healthcare providers now receive specific training about recognizing signs of medication manipulation by family members. Insurance companies have implemented additional oversight for policy changes made during times of family medical crisis. Law enforcement agencies have developed protocols for investigating suspected medical abuse in domestic situations. Elena's foundation has provided legal support for over 200 cases of suspected elder abuse, helping vulnerable adults navigate the complex intersection of medical, legal, and financial systems that predators like David understand how to manipulate. Her story is taught in medical schools, law schools, and social work programs as an example of how sophisticated abuse can be and how crucial it is for professionals to listen to potential victims even when their claims seem unlikely. People ask me if I regret trusting David for so many years, Elena said. But I don't regret my capacity for love and trust. I regret that David chose to exploit those qualities rather than deserve them. My ability to love deeply and trust completely aren't flaws that made me vulnerable. They're strengths that David was too small to appreciate. Elena never remarried, but she built meaningful relationships with friends, colleagues, and fellow advocates who shared her commitment to protecting vulnerable adults. Her life became fuller and more authentic than it had ever been during her marriage to David, because it was built on truth rather than the illusion of safety through dependence. David thought that by making me dependent on him, he was ensuring my loyalty and compliance, Elena observed. He never understood that true partnership is built on mutual respect between equals, not on one person's exploitation of another's vulnerabilities. The life I built after his betrayal is everything I thought I had with him, except real. Elena's story ends not with forgiveness or reconciliation, but with transformation and empowerment. She changed from a victim who had been systematically isolated and weakened into an advocate who used her experience to protect others. Her recovery demonstrated that even the most intimate betrayal cannot destroy someone who refuses to accept defeat. David wanted to erase me and replace me with his life insurance payout, Elena concluded. Instead, he created something he never expected, a woman who understood exactly how predators operate and was determined to stop them. He thought he was destroying my life, but he was actually creating my life's work. In the end, David's betrayal became the foundation for everything meaningful I accomplished afterward. The woman who had almost been erased by her husband's conspiracy became a powerful voice for protection, justice, and the resilience of the human spirit. Elena's story proved that sometimes saving your own life requires the courage to destroy what you thought was love, and that the person who emerges from that destruction can be stronger, wiser, and more authentically alive than the person who entered it.